There is a specific kind of humiliation that does not arrive with shouting or broken dishes, or the kind of scene that at least gives you something to point to later. It arrives quietly, in front of people, at a table set for celebration, with a hand on your shoulder and a single sentence spoken in the calm of someone who has always known they could get away with it. I was 23 years old. It was Christmas Day, the kind of Christmas Day that Black families build all year for. My grandmother's good china out, the good tablecloth pressed and laid perfectly, sweet potato pie cooling on the counter, gospel playing low from the kitchen, the smell of everything that means home and safety and belonging drifting through every room of that house. I had been at that table my entire life, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, and every Easter Sunday. My seat was the third one on the left. I knew it the way you know things that have always been true. And then my stepmother walked up behind me, put her hand on my shoulder in front of 23 family members who all turned to look, and said 5 words I have never forgotten. "This seat is for my real daughter." And she pushed me out of it. Not hard enough to make a scene, just hard enough to make a point. I caught the edge of the chair on the way down. The room went quiet in that specific Black family quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of everyone deciding at exactly the same moment that they had not seen what they just saw. I got up. I smoothed my dress. I walked out of that dining room with my head straight and my face completely still. And nobody, not my stepmother, not my father sitting right there saying absolutely nothing, not one single person at that table, had any idea that the woman walking out of that room was not the same woman who had walked in. Because in the 30 seconds between that push and that door, I had made a decision. And that decision was going to change every single thing. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let me take you back. Because to understand what happened after that Christmas dinner, you need to understand everything that came before it. And everything that came before, it had been building for a very long time. My name is Natalie. I grew up in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. Lithonia, to be specific, one of those solid Black middle-class neighborhoods where everybody knew everybody, and Sunday morning meant church, and Sunday afternoon meant somebody's house smelled like fried chicken and the kind of loud, comfortable family noise that makes you feel like the world is exactly the right size. My parents divorced when I was 6. My father remarried when I was 8. Her name was Diane. She came with a daughter named Madison who was 7 years old, 1 year younger than me, with her mother's eyes and her mother's very particular talent for occupying the center of every room she walked into without appearing to try. I remember the first Sunday Diane and Madison came to our house for dinner. I remember my grandmother, my father's mother, Mrs. Estelle, the woman who had been the warm, steady, unshakable center of our family my entire life, watching from the kitchen doorway with an expression I was too young to read correctly at the time. I understand it now. It was the expression of a woman who already knew something that was going to take everyone else years to see. Diane was not a monster. I want to say that clearly and mean it because this channel does not tell stories about monsters. It tells stories about patterns. And Diane's pattern was one of the most common and most quietly devastating patterns in blended Black family life. The pattern of a mother who loves her biological child with her whole heart and has a very human difficulty extending that same wholeness to someone else's child. She never screamed at me. She never called me names. She never did anything that any single person in my family could have pointed to on any single day and said that is wrong and that needs to stop. What she did was smaller than that, quieter than that, and in many ways more damaging than anything loud could ever have been. Madison's school events went on the family calendar in red marker the same day the flyer came home. Mine were written in pencil and sometimes erased by the time the day arrived. Madison's friends came over to a house that opened itself up. Snacks on the counter, Diane asking questions, genuine interest and warmth filling every corner of the room. My friends came over to a house that tolerated them with a politeness that was always exactly 1 degree cooler than welcome. Madison's report card went on the refrigerator. Mine was acknowledged with a nod and a "that is good, Natalie," before the conversation moved on to something else. And my father who I loved and who loved me. My father who coached my little league team when I was 9 and taught me to drive when I was 15 and cried at my high school graduation. My father chose silence every single time. Not because he did not see it. I know now that he saw it. He chose silence because choosing anything else would have required a confrontation he did not have the courage for. And silence, when someone you love is being slowly made invisible, is not neutrality. It is a choice. It is the choice that costs the invisible person everything while costing the silent person nothing. I learned over 15 years of living inside that family to make myself smaller, to need less, to stop bringing things to the table I already knew would not be received with the warmth they deserved, to find my celebration inside myself because the outside was not reliably available, to become, slowly and without anyone ever explicitly asking me to, a ghost in my own home. I was good at it by the time I was a teenager. By the time I was 23, I was extraordinary at it. I had a degree in accounting from Georgia State. I had a job I was good at. I had an apartment I had furnished myself with the specific satisfaction of a woman who had learned to build her own floor because the one she was supposed to stand on kept shifting. I had Estelle who called me every Sunday morning without exception and whose voice was the most consistent proof I had that I was real and seen and worth something. And I had a pattern I had been living inside for 15 years that was about to reach its breaking point at a Christmas table set with my grandmother's good china. But before I take you to that table, I need to tell you about the summer. Because the push at the Christmas table was not the beginning. It was the end of a beginning. And what happened in the summer is the part of this story that changes everything you think you understand about what came after. It was August, 4 months before Christmas. I had come back to my father's house in Lithonia to help organize my grandmother Estelle's 80th birthday celebration. She had asked me specifically to coordinate it. Not Diane, not Madison, who was 22 by then and had just finished her first year of graduate school on a full scholarship that my father had announced at Easter dinner, with a pride so complete and so unguarded that I had to look down at my plate to keep my face still. Estelle had asked me. And I think everyone in that house understood what that preference meant. I was in my father's study looking for the guest list Estelle had given him to keep when I found the envelope. It was not hidden. It was in the second drawer of his desk in a plain manila folder with nothing written on the outside. I almost put it back. I want to be honest about that. Something in me, the part that had spent 15 years learning not to look too closely at things in that house, almost put it back and kept searching for the guest list. But I had also spent 15 years developing a very finely tuned instinct for the things that were being kept just out of my sight. And that instinct, on that August afternoon, with the Atlanta heat pressing against the study window and the sound of Diane and Madison laughing about something in the kitchen down the hall, told me to open it. Inside the folder were 3 documents. The first was a life insurance policy, my father's, taken out 4 years earlier. The beneficiary listed was Diane, which was not surprising. What was surprising was the secondary beneficiary, not me, Madison, his stepdaughter, a woman with a different last name and a different biological father who was still very much alive and paying child support from a suburb of Birmingham. The second document was a property deed. My grandmother Estelle's house, the house where every Christmas had been held, where my earliest memories lived, where the good china was kept and the gospel played low on Sunday mornings. The deed had been transferred 18 months earlier, into Diane's name. I sat with that for a moment. My grandmother's house, in Diane's name. I thought about Estelle calling me every Sunday morning. I thought about whether she knew. I thought about whether she had been the one to sign or whether she had signed something she did not fully understand because she trusted her son, and her son had learned a very long time ago the particular convenience of being trusted by the people who love you. The third document I am going to tell you about shortly. Because the third document is the one that explains everything that happened at Christmas. And it is the one that made the plan I built in the 4 months between that August afternoon and that December dinner table both necessary and, I will be honest with you, satisfying in a way that I am not entirely ashamed of. But first I need to tell you about Mrs. Estelle and what she told me the Sunday after I found that envelope. Because Estelle had known something for 2 years, and she had been waiting for exactly the right person to finally be ready to hear it. I called Mrs. Estelle the Sunday after I found the envelope. I did not tell her what I had found. I just called the way I always did, and I listened to her voice, and I waited. Estelle had a particular way of talking around something important, a quality that I had always attributed to age and indirectness, but that I understand now was actually the patience of a woman waiting for the conversation to be ready for what she needed to say. We talked for 40 minutes about ordinary things. Her garden, the birthday celebration plans, a neighbor whose business she found questionable. And then in the way that Estelle always arrived at the thing that actually mattered, she said, "Natalie, I need you to know something." And the particular weight in those 6 words made me sit down on my apartment floor, the way you sit when your body understands before your mind does that. What comes next is going to require your full attention. She told me that 2 years earlier, during a period when her health had been uncertain and her fear had made her more dependent on my father than she had ever been in her life, she had signed documents she did not fully understand. She had trusted my father. She had trusted that he was organizing her affairs the way a good son organizes his mother's affairs when she is frightened and not entirely well. She had not understood that what she was signing transferred ownership of her home. She understood it now. She had understood it for 8 months. She had not told anyone because she did not yet know what to do with what she knew. Also because she was 80 years old and she was tired, and the thought of a confrontation with her son felt like more than her body currently had available. But she had been waiting. She told me that. She had been waiting for the right moment and the right person. She said, "I always knew it would be you, baby. You are the one in this family who notices things." I sat on my apartment floor for a long time after that call. I thought about a woman who had spent 80 years building something, a home, a legacy, a place where every Christmas felt like proof that the family was solid and real and worth the work of maintaining. I thought about what it cost to have that building taken from you quietly by someone you trusted while you were frightened and unwell. I thought about my father, about the specific kind of man who can love his mother and his daughter and still make the choices he had made. About how those 2 things, love and betrayal, are not actually opposites. About how the most damaging betrayals almost always come from people who genuinely believe they love you. And then I stopped thinking about feelings, and I started thinking about accounting, because I had a degree in it, and what Estelle had just described to me had a name in the legal and financial world. And that name opened a door that my stepmother's hand on my shoulder at a Christmas table 4 months later was going to make me very ready to walk through. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because before the plan there was Christmas, and before Christmas there was the third document, the one I have not told you about yet. The one that explains why my stepmother did what she did at that table, and why she was so certain, so completely and catastrophically certain that she could get away with it. The third document in that manila folder was a will. My father's will, updated 14 months before that August afternoon. I am going to tell you what it said, and I need you to stay with me because this is the part of the story that reframes everything that came before it. The will divided my father's estate, his savings, his pension, his portion of Mrs. Estelle's house, which he had already transferred to Diane, his life insurance, into 2 equal parts. 1 part to Diane, 1 part to Madison. I was not in it. Not as a primary beneficiary, not as a secondary beneficiary, not anywhere. I had been removed, not forgotten. That would have been easier to carry. Removed. At some point in the previous 14 months, my father had sat down with an attorney and deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what he was doing, and taken my name out of his will and replaced it with his stepdaughter's, the daughter of a man who was still alive in Birmingham paying child support. And I understood in that moment, sitting in his study in the August heat with that document in my hands, I understood the full architecture of what had been built around me. I understood why Diane had always been so calm, so certain, so unhurried in her preference for Madison over me. When you know the ending of a story, you can afford to be patient about every chapter that comes before it. She had known for over a year that in the eyes of my father's legal and financial arrangements, I did not exist. That I had been quietly, legally, officially erased from the family I had spent 23 years being a ghost in. I put the documents back in the folder. I put the folder back in the drawer exactly as I had found it. I went back to looking for the guest list. I found it. I spent the rest of that afternoon coordinating Estelle's birthday celebration with the specific focused attention of a woman who has just understood something that is going to require her full capabilities. And I did not say a single word to anyone, not yet, because what I had learned from 15 years of being the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one nobody worried about, was this. The most powerful position in any room is the one nobody is watching. And nobody in that family had been watching me for a very long time. That was about to become the most expensive mistake they ever made. Christmas arrived the way it always did in Atlanta, not cold enough to feel like Christmas exactly, but decorated and intentional and carrying all the specific weight of a Black family holiday that has been practiced and perfected over generations. I arrived at my father's house at 11 in the morning. I had spent the previous 4 months doing something nobody in that house knew I was doing. I had spent 4 months consulting quietly with an elder law attorney named Patricia Coleman, who specialized in exactly the kind of situation Mrs. Estelle had described to me on that Sunday phone call. I had spent 4 months gathering documentation, carefully, methodically, without a single word to my father or Diane or anyone except Estelle and my cousin Deshawn, who was the one person in the family I trusted completely and who had a very particular talent for finding information that people had assumed was safely hidden. I had spent 4 months building something, and I walked into that Christmas dinner with everything I had built, filed in a secure folder on my laptop in my apartment, and a meeting scheduled for the 27th of December with Patricia Coleman and Mrs. Estelle and a notary. All of that was already in motion when I walked through the door that Christmas morning and hugged my father and said Merry Christmas to Diane and watched Madison come down the stairs in a new dress that Diane had clearly bought her and felt the whole familiar weight of that family settle back onto my shoulders the way it always did when I walked into that house. We ate appetizers, we talked. My uncle played dominoes in the living room with 2 of my cousins. My aunt helped in the kitchen. Everything was ordinary and warm on the surface the way that family always was on the surface. Then we sat down for dinner, and Diane walked up behind me, said what she said, and did what she did. I hit the edge of that chair, and 23 people watched, and the room went quiet. I got up, and I smoothed my dress and I walked out. In the car on the way back to my apartment, I called Deshawn, and I said, "We are moving the meeting to the 26th. He said, "What happened?" I said, "She just made it easier." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Are you okay?" And I thought about it honestly, the way I had learned to think about things honestly in 4 months of building something in secret, and I said, "I am better than okay. I am clear." And clarity, after 23 years of explaining things away, felt like the most powerful thing I had ever felt in my life. The meeting on the 26th was 2 hours long. Patricia Coleman sat across from Mrs. Estelle and me and Deshawn, and she went through every document with the focused precision of a woman who had spent 30 years doing exactly this kind of work for exactly this kind of family. What she confirmed was what I had already understood from the August afternoon in my father's study. The transfer of Mrs. Estelle's property had been executed during a period when Mrs. Estelle's documented medical records showed she had been on a combination of medications that significantly affected her cognitive clarity and her capacity for fully informed consent. That was the legal language. The human language was simpler. My grandmother had been taken advantage of when she was sick and frightened by a son she trusted. Patricia Coleman filed the legal challenge to the property transfer on the 28th of December, 3 days after Christmas. My father received the notification on the 30th. I know exactly what that morning looked like in that house because Deshawn was there when the certified letter arrived, and he described it to me later with the specific detail of someone who had been waiting a long time to witness something. My father called me 4 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail. On the 4th message, he said, "Natalie, I do not know what you think you are doing, but this is not how we handle family business." I thought about 23 people watching from a Christmas table. I thought about a will with my name removed. I thought about 15 years of pencil on a calendar while Madison got red marker. And I sent him a single text message back. I said, "I learned how to handle family business from you, Dad. I am just finally doing it out loud." I did not hear back that day. The property transfer challenge moved through the legal process over the following 4 months. Patricia Coleman was thorough, and the documentation of Mrs. Estelle's medical condition during the signing period was clear and well supported. The transfer was reversed. Estelle's house was returned to her. My father agreed, as part of a mediated family agreement that his attorney strongly advised him to accept. To update his will to include me as an equal beneficiary alongside Madison and Diane. He also agreed to a formal acknowledgement, not a dramatic confession, not a public reckoning, just a quiet, witnessed, documented acknowledgement that what had been done to his mother and to me had been wrong. Diane did not agree easily, but Diane did not have a choice because the alternative was a legal process that was going to be significantly more uncomfortable than the agreement on the table. Madison called me in March. We talked for the first time in a real way in years. She did not know about the will. I believe that. She cried. I listened. I did not comfort her the way I would have before that August afternoon in the study. But I did not hang up either, because this was never about Madison. It was never about punishing anyone. It was about a pattern, and patterns do not require punishment. They require truth. They require documentation. They require someone finally saying out loud what everyone else in the room has been deciding not to see. My father and I are in a careful, cautious, honest process that I am not sure has a resolution yet. He loves me. I know that. And love, as I have said before on this channel, is not the same as seeing someone. It is not the same as protecting them. It is not the same as choosing them when the choice costs you something. But it is a beginning. And beginnings, when you are 23 years old and you have just spent 4 months learning what you are capable of, are enough to work with. I want to talk about the patterns. Not just Diane's patterns, not just my father's patterns, but the patterns I carried. The ones I had been practicing my entire life without knowing they had a name. The first pattern is the one I described at the beginning. The invisible child in a blended family. This pattern is extraordinarily common in Black family life and extraordinarily under-talked about. The blended Black family carries enormous cultural pressure, the pressure to appear unified, to present a picture of successful reconstitution, to demonstrate to the church and the community and the extended family that the divorce did not break anything permanently. And inside that pressure, the children who do not fit the new picture most naturally, the children from the previous relationship, the children who represent the before, are the ones most likely to become invisible. Not because anyone decides to make them invisible, but because the path of least resistance in a family trying to hold itself together is always the quietest child. Always the one who has learned to need less, always the one you do not have to worry about. The second pattern is the one my father embodied. The loving but absent parent. The parent who sees what is happening and chooses silence because silence is cheaper than confrontation. This pattern costs the invisible child everything while appearing to cost the silent parent nothing. I want to say very directly to anyone listening who recognizes their own parent in my father, the cost is not nothing. The cost is the relationship. The cost is the trust. The cost is the 23 years of a daughter making herself smaller so that the family could stay comfortable. That is what silence costs. It just takes longer to arrive at the bill. The third pattern is the one I had to break in myself, the pattern of smallness, of needing less, of celebrating alone, of making myself a ghost to keep the peace. It started in Lithuania in a blended family when I was 8 years old, and it had been running so long and so quietly that by 23 I had almost entirely forgotten that it was a pattern rather than simply who I was. Breaking it did not feel like power at first. It felt terrifying. It felt like the specific terror of a woman who has spent her entire life being careful suddenly deciding to take up exactly the amount of space she was always entitled to. But terror and rightness can exist in the same moment. And on the other side of that terror, on the other side of that Christmas table and that August afternoon and that December meeting with Patricia Coleman, was the clearest, steadiest, most completely myself I had ever felt in my life. And that feeling, for anyone still standing at their own table wondering if it is worth it, that feeling is worth everything. Mrs. Estelle turned 81 in August of the following year. We held the celebration at her house, back in her name, exactly as it should always have been. She wore a yellow dress and her good earrings, and she sat at the head of her own table with the specific dignity of a woman who has seen something attempted against her and watched it fail. She held my hand before we started, and she said, "You are the one who notices things." I told her I learned it from her. She laughed the way she laughs, deep and certain and completely unworried about whether it is too loud. I think about that moment when this story feels too heavy to tell. When I wonder whether airing the truth about a family that is still in the process of figuring out how to be honest with itself is the right thing to do. And then I think about every woman who is sitting somewhere right now at her own version of a Christmas table. The one who has been making herself smaller for so long she has almost forgotten her own full size. The one whose name is written in pencil while someone else gets red marker. The one who is told by everything around her that her needs are manageable and her feelings are reasonable to overlook, and her presence at the table is conditional on her continued willingness to take up less space. This story is for her. Not as a blueprint for revenge. Revenge was never the point. The point was documentation. The point was truth. See, the point was an 80-year-old woman getting her house back and a 23-year-old woman finally understanding that the people who overlook you are not seeing clearly, and their limited vision was never a verdict on your worth. The point was a pattern, quiet, ordinary, ambient, and devastating, being named out loud in the specific way that patterns lose their power when they are finally seen. I am Natalie. I am 24 years old. I have a job I am good at and an apartment I furnished myself and a grandmother who calls every Sunday morning and a cousin named Deshawn who I trust completely and a lawyer named Patricia Coleman who I will keep on speed dial for the foreseeable future. I am not a ghost anymore, and nobody at my table is going to tell me to get out of my seat again. If this story named something you have been carrying, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Not for the views, for her. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if you have ever been the invisible one at your own table. And subscribe so every new story finds you because we are just getting started. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting someone else's truth sit next to your own for a little while. Thank you for being the kind of person who stays until the end. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Stay quiet. Stay aware. Break the pattern. Every story on this channel is built from truth, the kind of truth that lives in patterns, not in names. The characters you met today are composites. The pain they carried is not. If something in this story found you, that was not an accident. Take care of yourself. And if you need more than a story can give, please reach out to someone who can hold it with you.